The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I am your host, Len B.A., and I have with me this evening Rodrigo Camarena. As director at Justicia Lab and Immigration Advocates Network, Rodrigo Camarena has more than 5 years of experience in leading and managing nonprofit legal tech initiatives that aim to transform immigrant justice through collaboration, creativity, and technology. He has a Master of Science in Economic History from the London School of Economics and Political Science and is a graduate of the Stanford University Executive Program for Nonprofit Leaders. Rodrigo has worked hand in hand with immigrants and their advocates to identify common challenges and incubate scalable digital tools that help immigrants navigate the immigration system, find workplace justice, and more. He also supports innovative thinkers who turn strong concepts into prototypes and provide mentorship to participants of Civic Hall Labs CivicXcel program. Rodrigo Camarena, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thank you so much, Len, for having me. Good to be here.
I want to talk with you at length about wage theft, which is an issue that you have worked on a lot and that your organization has developed some services around. Wage theft is not really well known or well recognized by a lot of people, but it's huge. The Economic Policy Institute has estimated that wage theft in the United States amounts to over $50 billion a year. That's billion with a B. That's equivalent to 5.5 million stolen cars or 12 million bank robberies. In fact, wage theft dwarfs all other property crimes combined. Do you think that's an accurate estimation of the scale of wage theft in our country?
It's probably an underestimate of that, and that statistic is actually a few years old now. But you're right; it's measured to be in the tens of billions. It's the largest form of theft, larger than robberies, burglaries combined. And it's something that we don't really talk a lot about as a country and as a society.
And what forms does wage theft take?
Yeah, so wage theft isn't a legal term per se. It's a term that advocates and policymakers use to explain generally whenever a worker doesn't receive the wages that they're entitled to under the law. So that includes not being paid a minimum, paid overtime, or in general when a worker is just not paid. Sometimes workers show up, especially immigrant workers and day laborers, and aren't paid when they're supposed to be paid. It also includes not being paid sick leave, other forms of theft. But it's very common. It's actually more common in some industries to experience wage theft than to be paid the wages that you're owed. And it's a problem that we need to talk about, really address structural inequality, poverty, and many of the issues that ail low-income communities and communities of color.
Who is most affected? What kinds of workers are most affected by this?
So most low-wage workers, folks that are, meant to be paid minimum wage, are victims of wage theft. This also, and it disproportionately impacts those that are foreign-born. So immigrants are oftentimes the main victims of wage theft. Whether they're just being from elsewhere, not knowing the laws of the country, or not having resources to push back when you think you've experienced wage theft. It's very common, and obviously this problem is even among undocumented immigrant communities who feel like they are not entitled to work or don't have rights because of their status. And so a lot of our work is really about educating and informing also immigrants specifically about their rights, letting them know that their rights as workers are very strong in this country, and that if they so choose to, they can fight for the wages that they're owed and bill and wages.
Yeah, and it seems like I know in the condition of being an undocumented worker here, it is often a sense of, well, you can't complain because you'll get turned into the authorities and deported. Or do undocumented immigrants actually run that risk if they react to an employer that's not giving them everything that they're supposed to receive?
It's very scary to speak out when you've been a victim of wage theft or some kind of workplace injustice, even if you are with status, right? Imagine this problem, we're experiencing a wage violation or a workplace injustice when you're undocumented. It's even scarier, right? If you don't speak the language, if you don't know the laws, if you feel like you're already in the crosshairs of the government. The truth is that the Fair Labor Standards Act in this country protects undocumented workers from retaliation and entitles them to the same protections as documented workers when it comes to their rights as workers. So there's actually various sections for all workers, including those that are undocumented, that have been upheld time and time again in courts. And so, it seems counterintuitive, right? If you're here without status, you are entitled to the same protections as every other worker, but it's actually something that our courts and our laws have upheld for a very long time.
Wow. And yet it does seem that there is that risk. I mean, I've heard of ICE making raids on workplaces just to catch people who are undocumented. So if someone were to go and seek help from a state agency or from the federal agencies that deal with this problem, is there a chance still that they may end up, maybe they'll get their pay if they're fortunate, although from what I understand, a lot of times these cases don't result in people getting what they're owed. But if they got their pay, if they got it, but they're also deported, that seems like a risk they may run. Is that not the case, or are they completely protected during the time that they're trying to get their back pay?
Well, it depends. And actually, the Biden administration just announced earlier this year, a process for deferred action for workers that are involved in labor disputes. So it actually makes it so that someone has a temporary protection from deportation, a labor violation or in a labor dispute. This is very new, and advocates are trying to figure out how to navigate it. But it might make it so that if a worker reports a violation under investigation, deportation or action to remove them might be delayed. And so this is new and, again, not very known. And so that's a protection that the example that you gave of a workplace being raided and workers potentially being detained, that's different. But I think, to be honest with you, I think what we want to let people know is that if they feel like they've been cheated out of wages, if they feel like their employer is abusing them or harassing them or exploiting them, that it's very on their side, as long as they can show evidence of this, if they can meet with an advocate that listens to this story, documents it well, and can prosecute a case.
I've heard stories from people who worked as in-home caregivers, as janitors for contract janitorial services, as hotel maids, and as farm workers who all had experienced some form of wage theft. And in all cases, these are very anecdotal. I'm not doing a statistical analysis here, but the people I happen to have encountered, they either recovered nothing or they only recovered part of what they were owed. I understand that in California, which has more protections than some states for workers who are victims of wage theft, Still, in California, only 58% of the claims, and that's people who report it, resulted in receiving the unpaid wages. What's going on here? Why is it so hard for people to recover their pay?
Yeah, it's a big problem, So there's a lot of obstacles. There's obviously the fear in reporting the crime, right? If you're low wage, if you're a person, low income, or an immigrant. So that's one major obstacle. Number two, knowing how to even report that you've been a victim of wage theft is another obstacle. Government forms that you have to fill out that are written in legalese and that really require a specialist to help you file. And then there's a problem of enforcement, right? So a lot of these agencies, state-based, and the number of investigators or resources to do an adequate job of investigating these claims even after you've reported them. And so, like you said, the deck is really stacked against workers. It's stacked against anyone that on a workplace problem. And so, what we're trying to do through initiatives like Reclamo is simplify the process, make it understandable, make it plain language, translate it, and use technology to automate the process of completing a wage theft violation form in New York State, as well as filing a demand letter, which is effective ways of getting money back. And this letter is typically, a sternly worded letter that cites the violations that the employer has committed and tries to negotiate with them on monies owed. So there's a lot of tactics outside of an agency process that are actually more effective at getting money back. But you're right, it's a very tough road to go down. And what we're trying to do is chip away at this problem just a little bit by using technology to facilitate. It'd be a very simple process and what should be something that is investigated and more effective at for people.
Yeah, and I came across a figure that there are about 650,000 complaints filed in the U.S. annually. But is that representative of the number of workers who are actually victimized, or is it a much bigger number?
You know, yeah, I mean, it's probably much lower, right? 650,000 reports, again, given all the impediments to reporting that I mentioned, right? Knowing the process, knowing the laws, having the courage to speak out, following up on that filing. It's really a lot to ask of a worker who isn't really that interested in filing money. They want to get what they're owed lawfully. So it's probably a figure that severely underreports the problem. And I think what we need to do is just recognize this is a problem that we're all in some shape or form experiencing, right? Wage theft, again, contributes to poverty. It contributes to uh, people's need to rely on certain forms of welfare. It cheats us out of city and state tax revenue. And so, much like workers are experiencing this problem, we're all, as a society, paying for it indirectly or directly. And I think part of the solution lies in us recognizing that, as a country, we rely on low wage work to get a lot of the services that and products that we enjoy. And we rely on a lot of immigrant labor to do that as well. And I think if we're truly going to take on this issue at a root level, we need to really think about how we produce and consume goods. We need to think about how employers across all industries treat their workers and how we strengthen the rights for every worker and how we take people out of the shadows. Our immigration laws are pushing people into vulnerable positions and exploitative workplace positions and don't do us any help. And so I think the problem is complex, but it's also very simple. And it's going to require individual action, state and federal policy. But I think, in our case, we're trying to use technology to really make a dent in accelerating people's ability to file claims and also accelerate their ability to reclaim stolen wages.
Mm-hmm. Anyone who's just joining us, my guest is Rodrigo Camarena. He is director of Justicia Lab and also a director of the Immigration Advocates Network. This app, I'll call it an app, I guess, I hope that's the right term, that Justicia Lab has
Yeah.
created. This is working with existing law. Like, so without any policy change, you're trying to give people a better avenue for filing claims and getting through that process, which at the very least should increase the number of people who do experience wage theft having an avenue to take some action on it. Is that right?
That's right. We're trying to take existing laws and bring technology to help people be able to use them. And I think that's sort of a problem across the board in our country. We have what we call an access to justice problem, where something like 90% of our civil legal needs and civil legal issues aren't adequately addressed. So that includes housing issues, that includes healthcare issues, legal issues, family law related issues, any civil legal issue. Uh, Typically, 9 out of 10 times we're not truly addressing it. So I think it's a broader problem that we face as a society. There's been a lot of effort to try to bring more light to this problem, but we're trying to do, and what many other advocates are trying to do, is leverage technology to make it so that, like I often say, it should be as easy as it is to uphold your rights as it is to order an Uber. And if we invested a modicum of the amount that we do to, some of these other tech initiatives that, bring us from point A to point B, as we do as the things that, keep us healthy, keep us safe, our civil legal rights, we would, fare much better as a society. And so I think we need to understand people's needs as, when it comes to technology, and the use of technology is varied. We're not just trying to, go online and go shopping. We're also trying to learn online. We're trying to receive healthcare online, and I think increasingly we need to think about the investments we make in people's ability to uphold their rights and use the law online.
So that would be, I mean, it seems like that would, first of all, make it faster and easier for people who, in many cases, I know, low wage workers are working, 2 jobs or, 3 part-time jobs or whatever it is. And, as you said, just the time it takes to go and show up at the labor office for your state and file the paperwork and all that. You need, in California, you need to make an appointment in advance. You need to go to an appointment, you need to show up for the appointment. Then you have paperwork to fill out. Like, it's all very time consuming. And I can't imagine going through that if you're working full time and you're, say, trying to raise kids at home or, have other responsibilities. And so often people are working more than 40-hour weeks, which is, one of the things of wage theft, of people working overtime but not getting paid for overtime, or, working off the clock because their employer demands it but not getting paid for anything in excess of 8 hours. So, it's kind of compounding the very problem you're trying to treat. So with this Reclamo application, people can they do all of it online, or are they still required to go through some other steps?
Yeah, so the current version of the tool is really geared towards helping worker centers help workers file claims. So it's there's a whole community of helpers out there that aren't lawyers, that aren't necessarily trained in wage and hour laws, but that can help someone navigate a process, right? Librarians, social workers, people at community-based organizations. And so what we're trying to do is give them the tools to help workers self-file these claims. And I think down the line, we want to make it so that workers can directly file these claims with these tools. But the current version of the tool is really geared towards the helpers that are already supporting workers with cases, whether they're doing it well or not. They care, they're interested, and they're already playing a role. And what we're trying to do is equip them to be more effective in what they're already doing. Yeah, so I think we see again a future where workers can do this directly, where there's not a lot of friction or a lot of intermediaries between a person and the claim that they're trying to file. And government can play a role. Government can invest in technology, in simplifying laws. They can hold employers more accountable, make it a higher cost to steal wages from workers. So different actors have different roles to play. We're sort of playing ours as technologists and as immigrant advocates that support organizations around the country.
Great. And I know that it seems that wage theft mostly affects low-wage workers. I mean, they're the ones who are, for the most part at least, the ones who are working in employment situations where where the employer has a lot of leeway, and those are mostly non-unionized jobs. Is there much of a record, or do we know, is wage theft also a problem in jobs where workers are represented by unions?
Wage theft is actually one of the most common forms by which unions identify shops to organize. So oftentimes it's sort of a harbinger for a workplace that isn't very good to its workers. I don't have statistics around, whether folks that are part of unions are victims at a higher rate. They're probably not, because they have that representation and then they have that support from labor. But wage theft is sort of one of these issues that really raises alarms when it comes to understanding whether an employer is treating their workers fairly. And so we hope that this tool helps more workers organize in their workplace. We hope that it helps workers file class action suits and claims as groups, and that we can hold employers accountable, industries accountable, and force government agencies to enforce these laws better, as well as pass stronger laws to really hold employers more accountable.
Yeah, and I know that wage and payment rules are governed by certain laws. Like there's the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, and there's other laws on the books, but they don't. In general, the legal system doesn't treat wage theft like other forms of theft. Why isn't it punished like other crimes? And could it be punished like other crimes are? Could we sort of raise the stakes a little bit as a disincentive for the wage theft that's occurring?
That's a really great question, and I think we certainly could. I think it's a violation. It's people are breaking the law. There are proposals to seize employers' assets. Some municipalities have revoked business licenses from businesses that have been shown to have workers' wages stolen. So we can raise the cost. I think there is apprehension nationally to do so, maybe because we see businesses as job creators, maybe because large employers are important to a lot of communities and maybe have political influence. But we can certainly raise the cost for companies. We do it a lot. We do it with foreign companies often that are trying to operate in the U.S. and have broken our laws. And I think we could certainly raise the cost for a lot of domestic employers. But I think there's also a lot of work that we can do with industry. I think there are ways to better educate employers. There are ways to help employers understand how this problem might appear in their job site. Oftentimes, especially in construction, there's a lot of subcontractors that are employing subcontractors, right? That don't know the practices of those folks two or three levels down. So while industry can do a lot more to protect workers, I think that to be fair, there's also a lot that our policy can do to make it clear, who is being employed by who, what the wage and hour rules are in a certain state, how they've changed. Public education is a big player here, and I think ensuring that we pass strong laws, but that also people know about them, and that these laws are enforced, and there's funding to enforce these laws is also a big part of the solution.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there are some policies that have been implemented at the local level that are for example, taking away business licenses. Obviously, it would be great if instead of having to take away business license, you could actually just get a business to follow the law in terms of compensating their employees. Are there other policies that have been implemented that you would consider good models for what can be done, more broadly around the country?
Yeah, I think you could bar certain employers from obtaining, government contracts or certain licenses. In New York, the Wage Theft Prevention Act of 2011 made it easier for employees to know what their salary is, what their rate of pay is, the basis of that wage payment, and it made language access easier when it comes to understanding and reading these laws. And so I think there's a lot of great models and examples from around the country, but that's sort of the problem a little bit with our federal system, and there's a patchwork of laws and policies, some good, some not great. But the federal government can also play a big role in strengthening workers' protections. The federal government hasn't raised the minimum wage in decades. That could be a good start to, letting people know that their work matters and that it's not to be exploited. And there's also some talk in Congress to pass the Wage Theft Prevention and Wage Recovery Act, which is a federal initiative to hold unscrupulous employers accountable for unfairly withholding wages. So there's a lot we can do at the state level. There's a lot we can do at the federal level, and there's a lot that advocates can do by working together, by using technology, which we're a big proponent of, to better understand the problem, to use data more effectively, to see patterns across employers or across industries. So there's a lot that I think we, along with others, are trying to do to really make this problem go away. Right? It's sort of this long-standing issue that only gets worse over time. It's particularly bad whenever there are large influxes of migrants arriving because there's a lot of competition for employment, and employers also feel emboldened to cheat people out of wages or just undermine people's rights. And so I think as migration increases to this country, as we think about our wage and hour laws, we really need to think about how they're enforced and how we're accounting for just the vulnerable situation that a lot of workers and people are in.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned raising the minimum wage. There are in many states, I don't remember the exact number, but I know it's over a dozen states have a sub-minimum wage for workers who receive tips, typically restaurant servers. And one form that wage theft takes is tips being stolen, like employers or supervisors actually taking the tips that have been received, supposedly on behalf of a worker. And particularly, I mean, it's bad enough even in California where servers have the same minimum wage as everybody else, but in states where the sub-minimum wage might be as low as $2.50 an hour, which it actually is in some states, to have your tips also stolen is just like there's no way to survive. So yeah, raising the minimum wage and perhaps getting rid of the sub-minimum wage. And I understand getting rid of the sub-minimum wage is going to be on the ballot in, I want to say Michigan. I'm not sure if I'm remembering right, and one other state at least in this coming spring. These kinds of changes could have a broader impact too on people who have experienced wage theft, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think tipping is interesting, and I worked in service and probably had tips stolen myself. I think there's a lot that we don't recognize that's odd about our relationship to labor and how we and what we consider work versus what we don't consider work. And it's just it's we're sort of creating these situations through just cultural norms that we have around, for instance, tipping, right? It's tipping, shared tips, allowing some people to be paid some sub minimum wages, allowing some workers to work more hours than others at the same rate. There's all these sort of carve outs for certain types of employment in certain industries that I think are just resoundingly unfair, inequitable. The agricultural industry is another big, area rife with worker exploitation and unscrupulous workplace practices, where people get paid by piece. They get paid by how many plants or crops they pick, and that's totally legal. There needs to be a reckoning at some point in this country around labor, its role. I know we've been talking a lot about hot labor summer and the organizing that we've seen in labor victories that we've seen in the car industry and in the entertainment industry, et cetera. But I think as a country, we really need to reckon with the role of immigrant labor and the gains that or losses that they are experiencing in this era that we're in.
That's a bigger subject, and maybe we can get into that a little more in the second half of the show. But we're going to take a really short break. We'll be right back with Rodrigo Camarena right after this. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, Len B.A., and my guest today is Rodrigo Camarena. He is director at Justicia Lab, and he has more than 5 years of experience in leading and managing nonprofit legal tech initiatives that aim to transform immigrant justice through collaboration, creativity, and technology. And we've been talking about wage theft, a $50 billion per year problem that affects mostly low-wage earners in the United States. And I have a couple more questions for you, Rodrigo, on that subject. I've read that the median wait time for a wage theft case in the United States is 6 months, but that in California it's over 14 months. And I happened to speak to someone who had worked for a contract janitorial agency who was owed over $14,000. This is someone who's already living at poverty level from my perspective, and from federal, and definitely from the federal income perspective. And they were owed over $14,000, and that case was dragging on. They actually had legal help. They were working on it, but it had been over a year and they still didn't have a resolution. I mean, it says this is the average in California, or the median in California is over 14 months. It seems like to me for low-wage workers that that's a pretty untenable position. I mean, if you have to pay rent or other expenses and you don't have the money coming in and you've been working, it's not like you need to go out and get a job. You've been working. What are people's recourse? What kinds of services are available to people trying to get wages recovered who are, really pretty much living hand to mouth?
I mean, this is really the fundamental problem. There aren't a lot of options, right? If you uh, did a month's work, let's say, and you're owed a month's wages, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, and suddenly the employer doesn't show up, right? The person that hired you, let's say you're a day laborer, them down, you don't know how to complain about the issue, you're kind of at a loss. And so I think this is why, the Department of Labor did a study on the impact of wage theft in California and found that this increases the use of public assistance and public benefits. This increases poverty. It makes poverty worse. In California, it raises poverty by 11% and in New York by 32% respectively. again, this is a problem that we're all paying for, right? Through the benefits that we all contribute to, but there isn't a lot of recourse. You are meant to wait for months on end, and you have to do the best you can. It's awful because this is clearly what we've told people. We've told people work hard, save up, and eventually you'll get out of the situation that you're in, whether you're in poverty or just low income. And I think it's so prevalent, the fact that it's so under investigated, and that it takes so long to track down money that's owed, really, contrast to this idea that you should just work hard and try to play by the rules in this country. So it's very, very sad. It's very damaging to families. We've heard that didn't have enough money to get back on the subway, to get back home, or were kicked out of their homes because they couldn't pay rent and are now unhoused. I think when we think about the broader problems that we all have in society, and the inequities that a lot of communities face, tackling the simple fact that people aren't being paid what they're lawful, in my view, just a starting point for addressing some of these other broader societal issues. And so, yeah, I wish I could say that people have a lot of recourse, but they don't. And so, yeah, we're to make things a little bit better for folks.
Yeah, and I know there are some community-based organizations that try to help people with this, but I guess what they call in economics the multiplier effect. We know that people who are in the lower income brackets spend more of their money. It recirculates in the economy. So when they're denied the money that they have earned, that's going to have a broader economic effect, right? Everything, every place that they would otherwise spend, if they don't have it, they aren't going to be spending it. And then they're, if they're, relying on some kind of welfare or other social assistance, it's not going to measure up to what they were earning when they were working. So it's got to have a broader impact on all the entire economy, not of their community, not just, the tax base, which, seems like, if we're talking 50 billion a year in lost wages, around the country, that's huge. I mean, that's enough that as that money multiplies, changes hands in the economy, it would really go places. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And that $50 billion figure is almost a decade old. So I think probably double than that. If we can make a conservative estimate. But no, you're right. It's a huge problem. It's a huge cost to everyone.
Yeah, that's huge. And Justicia Lab has produced this online tool, Reclamo, which is, basically in Spanish, I recover, I reclaim, what's mine. And you said it's designed to work for, people who are helping workers, essentially. It's not really just direct, fill out a few things and your forms are filed kind of thing. It's not that simple. But obviously you're working on multiple solutions and on multiple fronts. And I wondered if you could talk about a little, whatever you want to tell us more about that tool, and also what else you're involved in through the organization to help people navigate the problems they run into and the challenges they run into, particularly as immigrants. But obviously this applies to anybody who's working in those kinds of jobs.
So Reclamo really is to the types of tools that we build. So we've been doing this work. I've been at Justicia Lab for the last 5 years, but our organization is almost over 15 years old. We were formerly known as the Immigration Advocates Network. And Advocates Network is still a platform that we host, and it's actually a network of over 12,000 advocates. We're part of a larger nonprofit called Pro Bono Net that has sort of been pioneering access to justice, legal tech for. So Reclamo right now is designed to support worker advocates, but it will very soon be directly in the hands of workers. Our tools typically are there to help non-lawyers become force multipliers because our approach is that there just aren't ever going to be enough lawyers in this country to solve every civil legal issue that we have, whether it's in immigration, housing, workplace affairs, etc. And so, if we're really going to make a dent in serving this need, we need to empower individuals, right, by letting them know their rights, making laws simpler, making the path to filing or addressing issues shorter, but also by empowering the helpers, right? So I think the non-lawyers specifically. And so while there's a nascent project that's been live for about a year in New York State and helped file over $1.5 million in wage theft claims since it launched. Our tools find legal assistance. So immigrationlawhelp.org is a national directory of every nonprofit or legal aid immigration legal service organization in the country. IMMI.org, the tool that helps you identify if you're eligible for a form of relief, and that's been used by over 600,000 people. Citizenship Works is a sort of TurboTax for becoming a U.S. citizen. Over 50,000 people become U.S. citizens or know their eligibility. And so what we're trying to do across the board is empower immigrants by using technology and by those that are already supporting them. And so we're really building infrastructure for immigrants and their advocates, legal tech infrastructure, because it's very hard for individual organizations or communities to build large industrial strength tech tools. And so what we try to do is be that helper, that third party that supports. Our tools have been around for a while. They're used oftentimes without anyone knowing because we often let our on the ground partners lead when it comes to the provision of services. But our work gap that we see in the ability to get legal assistance to folks that are low income, vulnerable, undocumented, etc.
Yeah, that seems like a really invaluable service to be able to work with that. And I've been pretty privileged as a middle class white guy, and growing up in California. But I've still had to deal with the legal system on a few occasions, and I've found that having an education in how the law works is extremely important. And I spend a little bit of time working with what's called the Divorced Fathers Network, and just helping people understand what family law says in the state, which is pretty convoluted in California and probably everywhere, was really very valuable because a lot of times, people just have no idea what the framework is and that there are laws around this stuff. So to be able, for example, through immigrationlawhelp.org, or your other services, to be able to give people those tools seems like it opens the door. It gets things started in a way that if you don't know any of that stuff, you're really handicapped. And so I wanted to ask, what kind of issues? I mean, obviously, you mentioned you have a service for people who are looking into how do they become citizens. What other kinds of issues do immigrants face that your organization is involved with?
Yeah, so Reclamo is, us supporting immigrants with workplace justice issues, but our organization, Pro Bono Net, more broadly helps everyone address civil legal issues. So, we have a crime victims in New York State that helps, victims of crimes seek support. We partner with organizations that support tenants in addressing violation. We support victims of domestic violence and folks that have been are part of a domestic crime. So our tools and the tools at Pro Bono Net has built are really providing a lot of essential infrastructure for everyday Americans uh, like yourself, when you're going through a legal issue, navigate these problems. And so we're really filling a gap as civil society. We think that it's important to let technology play a role in helping us in every facet of our life, and more so when it comes to upholding our rights and exercising those rights. And I think, our big message to policymakers, to industry, to the philanthropic community, et cetera, is that we need to invest in systems that empower and uplift people. Because unless we do, we're really going to face the same systemic challenges that we all know too well.
Yeah, and it is systemic, and we could probably spend another entire program talking about the systemic challenges, but we're close to running out of time, and I want to give you a few minutes, Rodrigo, to just tell listeners how they might find out more about the work of Justicia Lab and your other affiliated organizations, and also perhaps how they might support the work that you're doing for on the behalf of immigrants and other low-wage workers.
Sure. Thank you again so much, Len, for the opportunity. People can learn more about our work by going to justicialab.org. That's JUSTICIALAB.org. Much like you, and I heard earlier, you're doing a fundraising drive. We're doing our own fundraising drive to help us continue to pilot new initiatives and bring the tools of justice to more people. So our cause are always welcome, and you can do that at justicialab.org//donate. I think, reaching out if you think you are, if that could benefit from one of our tools, please reach out and let us know. If you are a policymaker and want to know more about how legal technology can help streamline the delivery of services and expedite people's ability to seek recourse, reach out. But I think as Americans and as people who are, engaged in of ours, I think it's really important to understand how, we get our goods and services, what hands are involved, the conditions that those people are facing. We need more transparency around wage and hour violations. Our colleagues at Documented New York, which is a journalistic outfit, recently published a map of wage theft in New York State, and has done a lot of work to the issue business by business. And I think more initiatives like those are also helping, make this issue more apparent to everyday people. But no, and thank you and your audience for caring and for listening, and hope that we can continue to be in touch.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, thank you, Rodrigo Camarena. It's been a real honor and privilege to have you on the show. Thank you for your work and for your perspective on the state of our nation right now.
Thank you.